The Isle of Wight always felt like a small step sideways. You take the ferry and the water does something to the world. It rinses the edges, softens the rules, and when you arrive, even the light feels different. Down by the pier, the timbers breathe and creak like old ribs. Sea drips through beams like time leaking from a ceiling. And if you stand there long enough, you start to feel like the world has an underside. Not far from here, near marsh grass and a narrow stream, 2 children followed a strange sound in May 1973 and met something that wore colour like a warning. It held a microphone. It spoke without moving its mouth. And when they asked what it was, it only said, "You know." I haven't been to Sandown in over 20 years, but memory doesn't measure distance properly. When I was 15, me and 2 lads, both called John, got the hovercraft to ride, and did what teenagers do when they think the world is infinite. We walked right across the island, through the middle, heading for Sandown like it was marked X on an invisible map. We stayed in a youth hostel and one of the Johns took a photo under the pier, and it came out unusual. Not blurred, just unreal. Beams and shadow and sea drip arranged like a doorway, like the underside of the world had its own geometry. A few years later I was back on a college music tour, playing pubs and schools, carrying Heartbreak around like an extra instrument. One morning I went under the pier again, not for a photo, just to stand in it. And the strange thing is, it looked exactly like the photograph, as if the place had a fixed perspective, a frame it wanted to be seen through. That's why Sandown feels liminal to me, not haunted, just thin. So when I found the story of All Colours Sam, it didn't feel like a random legend. It felt like the island doing what it does, adding one more layer to the same old hush. Now let's go back to May 1973. Two children, one around 10, the other a bit younger, a girl called Faye and a younger boy. They're near Lake Common, an open green space with a marshy river area not far from Sandown Golf Club, and they hear something. Not a voice exactly, more like a rhythmic wailing, a crying call, as if something mechanical had learned how to mourn. Curiosity wins, it usually does. They follow the wailing, siren-like sound through scrub and reeds toward a narrow stream and a small wooden footbridge, and then they see it, a blue three-fingered hand gripping the underside of the bridge, and a blue wispy light. A figure climbs up onto the bridge, tall, unnaturally tall, nearly 7 feet by later descriptions. The first strange thing isn't even the outfit, it's the silhouette. A head that seems to sit straight on the shoulders, almost no neck. Then the colours, a pointed yellow hat with a bobble, 2 wooden-looking antennae, a big collar, a green torn tunic. It feels like a clown, but not a circus clown. More like a costume built from memory, as if someone described clown over a bad radio signal and something tried its best. The face is white, red hair like a fringe under the hat, 2 black triangles for eyes, a black dial for a nose, round discs on its cheeks, a yellow-lipped mouth that doesn't move when it talks. And it talks through a microphone, tinny, friendly, wrong.
Hello? Are you still there?
The children start to run, then stop, intrigued by the tone, as if it's playing a role, as if the voice needs help reaching our world. They ask questions. Are you a man? It laughs and says,
No.
Are you a ghost?
Not really, but in an odd sort of way.
So they ask what matters. What are you? And the answer is,
You know.
a sentence like a closed door or a mirror. Then comes the moment that fossilized the case. The figure takes a notebook and writes a message, clear enough that it's been repeated for decades, the words slightly jumbled.
Hello, and I am all colours Sam.
It's not, I'm from Mars. It's not, get out. It's a greeting, polite, almost administrative. Like the entity is introducing itself at the reception desk of reality. And that phrase, all colours, feels like more than paint. It feels symbolic. I'm not one thing, I'm many. Now we get to the part that makes people sit forward. Sam invites them into a hut out in the marshes. 2 levels like a wartime corrugated building. Inside they notice things that don't fit the setting. Patterns on the blue-green wallpaper that look like dials, controls, or design pretending to be equipment. But there are ordinary details too. An electric heater, furniture, a lived-in feel. Sam takes its hat off. Underneath, patchy red hair and 2 small white ears. It claims it eats berries, says it can clean river water, says it avoids people because it's afraid of them. And then comes the small specifics that make the story cling. Blue gloves, bare feet, 3 fingers, 3 toes. Sam tells them it has another hut on the mainland, another secret place that it goes to forage berries. There's also a little berry trick performed like a magician's flourish. Sam picks up a berry from a bowl and places it in his ear. It jerks its head forward and the berry pops out of one triangular eye. Another sharp thrust and the berry appears in its mouth. Upstairs, reached by a ladder, is a bare sleeping space, rudimentary, almost monk-like. Then the encounter ends. The children leave. They tell an adult. They're laughed at. And the marsh closes behind them like a book. Mechanical clown, mechanical clown. When will you turn the world upside down? The river brings water, the berries bring life. The world of the strange on the edge of a knife. Mechanical clown, mechanical clown. The town and its sadness, with laughter you drown. The children bring friendship, the colors will glow. In the hut by the marshland, you know. Here's the thing, stories like this don't always stay as stories. Sometimes a town adopts them. Sometimes the myth gets a wink on the promenade, and suddenly Sam isn't just a case file, it's part of the island's character. But the question remains, what was it? And before we get carried away by reeds and blue light, we have to talk about the paper trail. Most people don't meet Sam in the marsh. They meet Sam in a write-up. The key published account comes from BUFORA, the British UFO Research Association, printed years after the alleged 1973 encounter. So this isn't a report filed the next day. It's a story that travelled through time and through a family before it reached the page. In the BUFORA version, the chain runs like this. The children have the encounter, the sound, the bridge, the glow, the figure. They tell Faye's father, referred to as Mr. Y, and later the fuller account is written up and published. But that makes BUFORA our main text, but also a filtered one. Because Mr. Y isn't just passing a message, he becomes part of the lens. To be fair, the report gives us strong anchors, not vague spookiness, but specifics. A microphone, Strange costume geometry, a hut, a written message. Details that repeat themselves like a pattern. But it also leaves classic questions. The time gap memory doesn't vanish, it reshapes. The witness chain, no clean public statement from the moment itself. And the hut, the biggest physical claim, with no documented independent search you'd want to see. In some tellings, the hut disappeared within 2 weeks. That detail alone is enough to make skeptics sigh and believers lean in. One thing is true though, neither Faye or Mr. Y have ever tried to capitalise on the story, which they easily could have done. And there's one more reason Mr. Y matters in the BUFORA account, because he isn't the only person the children's story passes through. He also brings his own history of strangeness into the file. On October 20th, 1970, he's driving across the island when he notices something to his right. A large, multi-lit UFO hovering over the swampy margins of the River Yar. A ring of lights, some like bright red cherries with turquoise and white among them. No sound. And as he drives, it keeps pace, parallel, weaving, drifting, reducing, returning, as if it's watching him back. Then on March the 1st, 1972, he's at Compton Bay, perched on the cliff between 9 and 10 at night. He says he's been driven there by an unexpected tidal surge and a sense of droning underwater movement. And then he sees them, 2 yellow points of light just below the sea's surface, peering up at him like eyes. Close, wordless, and then gone. In the BUFORA account, Faye tells her father on June the 2nd, 1973, roughly 3 weeks after the incident, which puts the likely date in the middle of May somewhere. Mr. Y doesn't dismiss it. He writes about the feeling that Faye may have been drawn into something like a bubble of alien reality. None of this proves Sam. It doesn't turn a marsh encounter into certainty, but it changes the texture of the case. Because now we're not looking at one strange afternoon in isolation. We're looking at a small cluster of oddness. Sky, sea, marsh. An island that keeps stepping slightly sideways. So what do we do with that? We hold it up to the light. Because the question isn't only, what did they see? It's also, how did the telling shape what we're seeing now? And that's where we're heading next, to the explanations. Lantern 1, the human explanation. A person in a costume. A local eccentric. A prank. It explains the microphone, the hut, the heater, things that sound built. But it raises questions. Why a costume that strange? Why that geometric face? Why in the marshes? Still, people do odd things, and sometimes the simplest answer is the truest. Lantern 2, the story explanation. Memory isn't a tape recorder, it's a painter. This account reached the wider world years after the alleged event. Retelling shapes things. Childhood experiences can sharpen into myth. Not fake. Not necessarily, just formed. Once a story has a sketch and a name, and a phrase like all colours, it begins to behave like folklore. Lantern 3, the liminal explanation. Marshlands are thresholds, neither land nor water, always shifting. Places where sound travels strangely, where light behaves like a rumour. Across cultures, the other world isn't always a faraway planet. Sometimes it's nearby, just out of phase. And Sam, with a microphone like a translator, the triangles for eyes, the impossible name, feels less like a clown and more like a visitor from the border, not a demon, not a monster, something our minds dress in familiar shapes when faced with the unfamiliar. And maybe, just maybe, that's the heart of it. Because places don't just hold stories, they hold people. There's another reason Sandown stays with me, one I wanted to weave in here at the end. My Uncle Dave, my mum's eldest brother, ended up there. I wasn't especially close to him, but he mattered a lot to her. She always looked up to him. The last time we all came over as a family, Mum was trying to find him. No one knew where he'd gone, only a tip-off. He was working as a chef in a pub somewhere in Sandown. We walked into the first pub, and there he was outside, smoking on his break. Found in the simplest, strangest way, like the island handed him back for just a moment. He stayed there, and lived there, and years later, in 2018, he made his final decision. He took his own life in Sandown. And I'm sharing that with care, not for drama, but because it's part of why thresholds matter to me. When I talk about reeds and bridges and the waterline where the world goes quiet, I don't mean it as a spooky aesthetic. I mean it the way life can feel, how a place can hold different versions of time stacked inside it like hidden rooms. Teenage adventures, heartbreak mornings, family searches, old laughter, silence. And maybe that's why Sam still works as a story, because whether Sam was a prank, a myth, or something stranger, the island is real, the memories are real, and the way a place can keep your past inside it is real too. So I'll leave you with this. If you ever stand near the reeds, near the bridge, near the waterline where the world goes quiet, listen. Not for proof, but for presence. Because some mysteries aren't solved, they're kept.
Hello, I am all colours.
oh.